Every civilization that has ever collapsed showed the same 9 symptoms in roughly the same order across 2,000 years. From the late Bronze Age to the Western Roman Empire, to the Maya, to the Soviet Union, the checkpoint has read the historians who studied the collapses, and they all noticed the same pattern. By the end of this video, you will know all 9 of the symptoms, and you will know exactly how many of them are currently running inside your own life. Most viewers, when the checkpoint reads this list, count 6. Some count 7. The very honest viewers count 8. Almost no one counts fewer than 4. The reason this matters is the strangest thing in the entire field of collapse studies. The 9 symptoms do not just appear in civilizations. They appear in human lives. And the reason a person's life starts to feel like it is unraveling is almost never the thing they think it is. It is one of these 9. The checkpoint will inspect each one. Before the first symptom is named, one thing has to be said clearly. The checkpoint did not invent this comparison. The historian Joseph Tainter, in his 1988 book, The Collapse of Complex Societies, argued that civilizations do not collapse from a single dramatic event. They collapse from the slow accumulation of small failures of complexity that nobody had the energy to address while they were small. The historian Arnold Toynbee, working in the 1940s and 1950s across 26 civilizations, called this the failure of self-determination. Jared Diamond, in Collapse in 2005, called it the failure to anticipate or perceive. The checkpoint will tell you what every one of these historians was actually describing. They were describing a person. A civilization is not an abstract entity. It is a very large pattern of human attention, distributed across many bodies. When the pattern fails, the bodies are still there. Only the pattern is gone. Which means the same 9 symptoms that ended Rome can absolutely show up inside one human life that is quietly ending its own internal civilization without naming it. The checkpoint has watched this happen many times. Most people never notice this. Symptom 1, the decline of shared meaning. In every collapsing civilization, the first thing to go is not the army, not the currency, not the borders. It is the story everyone agreed to tell. In late Rome, it was the slow loss of belief in the res publica, the public thing, as something worth dying for. In the late Soviet Union, it was the moment, decades before 1991, when even the people inside the system stopped quite believing the official explanation of why the system existed. The checkpoint has watched this in the Maya, in the Han, in the Bronze Age palaces of Mycenae and Ugarit. The story stops working. The buildings still stand. The ceremonies still happen. But the meaning has quietly walked out of the room. Now turn the same ruler on a single life. The personal version of symptom 1 is the day a person stops believing the story they have been telling themselves about why they get up in the morning. The job is still there. The relationship is still there. The routine is still there. But the meaning that used to live underneath the routine has quietly walked out. If you have noticed yourself doing the same activities you have always done, but the reason underneath them has gone strangely silent, that is symptom 1. The checkpoint counts it as a 1. Symptom 2, currency debasement. Every collapsing empire eventually starts shaving the precious metal out of its coins. The denarius of Augustus in the late 1st century BCE was nearly pure silver. By the 3rd century, after 150 years of imperial overspending, it was less than 5% silver, painted on the surface to look like the old coin. The people noticed. They began hoarding the old coins and spending only the new ones. Inflation arrived not as an event, but as a slow drift downward in what the unit of value actually meant. The checkpoint will tell you what currency debasement actually is. It is not an economic event. It is the moment a civilization starts using the same word for two different things and pretending the two things are equal. Now turn the same ruler on a single life. The personal version of symptom 2 is the slow debasement of the words you use about your own life. Fine used to mean fine. Now it means do not ask. Busy used to mean busy. Now it means I do not want to look at what is underneath this. Resting used to mean resting. Now it means scrolling on a phone in a position that resembles rest. Every word in your inner vocabulary that has been debased is a small denarius, painted on the surface, missing the silver underneath. If you have noticed your own answers getting shorter, vaguer, more painted on, that is symptom 2. The checkpoint counts it as a 2. Symptom 3, elite overproduction. The historian Peter Turchin, working in the 2000s, named one of the most reliable predictors of civilizational instability ever found. Whenever a society produces far more people qualified for elite positions than the number of elite positions available, the surplus elites turn on the system that trained them. Late Republican Rome had this. Late Tang China had this. The lead-up to the French Revolution had this. The lead-up to almost every major political upheaval of the last 40 years has had it. The checkpoint will tell you what is actually being described. A society quietly promised every educated person that effort, merit, and credentials would be exchanged for a meaningful seat at the table. The seats stopped multiplying. The credentials kept multiplying. The exchange stopped clearing. Now turn the same ruler on a single life. The personal version of symptom 3 is the version of yourself you have been training for years, that there is no longer any seat for inside your actual life. The musician's self that has not been to the instrument in 3 years. The writer self that has not opened the document since last spring. The friend who shows up self that has not shown up since the move. The athlete self that has been carrying a ghost gym membership since 2024. Every unused, overtrained version of yourself is a surplus elite, sitting inside your nervous system, with no seat at your own internal table. The checkpoint will say directly, they do not stay quiet forever. Eventually, they turn on the system that trained them. That is what midlife restlessness actually is. If you have noticed an internal hum of resentment at the life you have built, coming oddly, from the parts of you that are not being lived. That is symptom 3. The checkpoint counts it as a 3. Symptom 4, hyper-specialization. Every late-stage civilization eventually produces a population so finely specialized that almost nobody can do anything outside their narrow lane. Late Rome had jurists who could not farm, soldiers who could not build, builders who could not heal. The system worked beautifully when everyone stayed in their compartment. The moment the compartment started failing, almost nobody had a backup skill. The Maya had it. The late Western Han had it. Industrial era Britain had it. The checkpoint will tell you what specialization actually does. It buys efficiency by selling redundancy. Now turn the same ruler on a single life. The personal version of symptom 4 is the moment a person realizes they have organized their entire identity around one thing: the job, the role, the relationship, the project, and they have no second economy underneath it. The checkpoint has watched what happens when the one thing wobbles. The whole life wobbles because the whole life was load-bearing on a single beam. If you have noticed that almost everything you do, think about, and worry about flows from one source, and a quiet voice has been asking you what happens if that source ever ends. That is symptom 4. The checkpoint counts it as a 4. Symptom 5, border anxiety. Every collapsing civilization eventually develops a strange, disproportionate obsession with its borders, long before the actual threat at the borders becomes serious. The late Roman Empire spent more on border fortifications in its last century than in the previous 5 centuries combined. The late Ming Dynasty rebuilt and obsessed over the Great Wall as the actual collapse came from inside. Late Byzantine emperors stared outward at threats that were small compared to the slow internal hollowing that no map could show. The checkpoint will tell you what border anxiety actually is. It is the displacement of a real internal symptom onto an external boundary that feels easier to defend. Now turn the same ruler on a single life. The personal version of symptom 5 is the disproportionate energy a person spends on small external boundaries. Who is texting them? Who is following them? Who is encroaching on their schedule? Who is taking up too much space? At the exact moment, the internal life is hollowing out. The checkpoint will say this carefully because the audience already knows about boundaries. Boundaries are real. They are useful. But sometimes the obsession with boundaries is a way of looking outward at something defensible, because looking inward at something hollow is unbearable. If you have noticed yourself spending unusual amounts of energy on external interpersonal logistics, while the internal compass has gone quiet, that is symptom 5. The checkpoint counts it as a 5. Symptom 6, the loss of long-term memory. Every collapsing civilization eventually loses access to its own deep history. The late Romans, by the 5th century, had forgotten how their own aqueducts were built. The Maya, in the late classic period, had forgotten how to read the calendrical inscriptions on their own grandfathers' stelae. The late Bronze Age palaces left behind tablets in scripts their own descendants could not decode for 3,000 years. The checkpoint will tell you what is actually being described. The civilization was still functioning. It just no longer remembered the original reasons for what it was doing. The story compressed into a slogan. The slogan compressed into a logo. The logo lost its meaning. The behavior continued anyway. Now turn the same ruler on a single life. The personal version of symptom 6 is the moment a person realizes they no longer remember why they wanted any of this. Why this city? Why this career? Why this person? Why this version of themselves? The behaviors are still there. The original reasons are forgotten. The checkpoint has met people who could not, under direct questioning, name the year, the room, or the conversation in which they decided to become the person they have now been being for 15 years. If you have noticed your own life feels strangely inherited, as if you are running someone else's program, and someone else turns out to be a younger version of you whose reasons you can no longer access, that is symptom 6. The checkpoint counts it as a 6. Symptom 7, visible inequality, invisible despair. Every collapsing civilization eventually produces a strange split between the visible measures of success and the invisible measures of suffering. Late Rome had record opulence at the top of the equestrian and senatorial orders, while plague, malnutrition, and quiet despair ran through the lower city. The late Tang produced the most refined court poetry in Chinese history, while the rural peasantry walked off the land. Late-stage Versailles produced the most elaborate court rituals in Europe while a country starved. The checkpoint will tell you what is actually being described. The visible scoreboard kept producing record numbers. The invisible interior of the civilization had quietly moved into a different, darker country. Now turn the same ruler on a single life. The personal version of symptom 7 is the gap between how a life looks from the outside and how it feels from the inside. The checkpoint has met many people whose external scoreboard, the salary, the title, the partner, the apartment, was the highest it had ever been, while the internal weather was the worst it had ever been. They could not say it out loud, because saying it out loud would have looked ungrateful. So they kept the scoreboard polished, and they let the despair go invisible. If you have noticed that the gap between what your life looks like and what it feels like has been quietly widening for several years, that is symptom 7. The checkpoint counts it as a 7. Symptom 8, the distrust of inherited institutions. Every collapsing civilization eventually loses faith in the systems it inherited: religious, political, judicial, educational, familial, long before it has built anything to replace them with. Late Republican Rome lost faith in the Senate. Late Imperial Rome lost faith in the army. Late medieval Europe lost faith in the church before the Reformation gave the loss a name. Late Soviet society lost faith in the party, while the party still officially ran everything. The checkpoint will tell you what is actually dangerous about this stage. It is not the loss of faith. It is the gap between the loss of faith and the construction of an alternative. In that gap, Civilizations live for decades, sometimes centuries, in a strange suspended state, running on rituals nobody believes in, governed by institutions nobody respects, narrated by stories nobody is moved by. Now turn the same ruler on a single life. The personal version of symptom 8 is the moment a person stops believing the inherited institutions of their own life, the career path, the religious tradition, the family expectations, the relational scripts they were given, without yet having built any replacement. The checkpoint has watched this in many viewers in their late 20s, mid 30s, mid 40s. They are no longer believers in the world they inherited. They are not yet believers in any world they have built. They are inside the gap. If you have noticed that almost every framework you were given for how to live has quietly stopped working, and you are now improvising in a way that feels both freeing and exhausting. That is symptom 8. The checkpoint counts it as an 8. Symptom 9. This is the one that historically arrives last. Here is the real issue. The ninth symptom of every collapsing civilization is the loss of the ability to imagine a future different from the present. The late Roman writers in the 5th and 6th centuries write with an extraordinary flatness about tomorrow. The future is no longer a place you go. It is a slightly worse version of today. The late Maya inscriptions stopped projecting forward. The late Soviet planners produce 5-year plans that nobody, including the planners, believes in. The checkpoint will tell you what symptom 9 actually is. It is the moment a civilization stops having a destination. The buildings keep getting built. The ceremonies keep happening. The currency keeps circulating even if it is debased, but there is no longer a forward. The civilization has entered what the historians sometimes call the long present, a state in which everything continues, but nothing arrives. Now turn the same ruler on a single life. The personal version of symptom 9 is the day a person realizes they have stopped imagining a future. They are no longer building toward anything. They are no longer falling toward anything. They are inside a long, flat present that simply repeats. The checkpoint has met viewers who have been inside this for years and did not know what to call it. Some called it depression. Some called it burnout. Some called it adult life. The checkpoint will say what it actually is. It is symptom 9. The internal civilization has stopped having a forward. If you have noticed that you can no longer easily picture yourself 3 years from now doing something materially different from what you are doing today, that is symptom 9. The checkpoint counts it as a 9. And here is the part history says without flinching. Of all 9 symptoms, this is the one that is hardest to reverse. I lived with 6 of the 9 symptoms for almost a decade and called it being a serious adult. That was not seriousness. That was an internal civilization quietly entering its long present, and nobody, including me, was reading the signs. The day I realized symptom 9 had arrived in me was the day I tried to picture myself 5 years forward and found nothing there. Not a bad future, not a good future, a flatness. That was the day. The checkpoint started keeping a watch. 9 symptoms. The checkpoint has now inspected every one of them. Symptom 1, the decline of shared meaning. Symptom 2, currency debasement, in your words. Symptom 3, elite overproduction in the unused versions of you. Symptom 4, hyper-specialization in a life balanced on one beam. Symptom 5, border anxiety, displaced outward from a hollow inside. Symptom 6, loss of long-term memory of why you wanted any of this. Symptom 7, visible inequality, invisible despair. Symptom 8, distrust of inherited institutions with nothing yet built in their place. Symptom 9, the loss of an imagined future. Now count. Honestly, the checkpoint is not asking for the polite count. The checkpoint is asking for the count you would write down if no one was watching. Most people land at 6, some land at 7. Whatever your count is, do not panic. Civilizations have shown all 9 and still recovered. Rome, after the 3rd century crisis, shed 2 of the 9 and bought itself another 200 years. The late Han had 8, briefly, and reorganized. The Byzantine Empire ran with 7 on and off for 1,000 years. The number is not the verdict. The verdict is what you do with the number. Here is the practice. The checkpoint will say up front, this one is a writing practice, because civilizational pattern is exactly the kind of thing the body cannot see and only the page can hold. Take a piece of paper or a clean note on your phone. Write the numbers 1 through 9 down the left side. Beside each number, write one sentence, not a paragraph, one sentence about whether that symptom is currently running inside your own life. If it is, mark it with a small dot. If it is not, mark it with a small dash. If you genuinely do not know, mark it with a question mark. Now look at the page. The checkpoint has watched what happens at this step. The viewer who would not have admitted any of this in a conversation suddenly cannot pretend not to see the page. The page is the only honest historian of a single life. Then choose one symptom, one to begin the slow internal reform on. Not all 6, not all 7, one. Civilizations that recovered did it the same way. They did not address all 9 at once. They addressed the one whose reversal would unlock the most others. Symptom 9, the loss of imagined future, is almost always the one that, if reversed even slightly, unlocks the others. So, if your honest count includes symptom 9, that is where the checkpoint would suggest you begin. One imagined future, 3 years out, materially different from today, written down. That is the entire first move. That is the practice. The checkpoint has noticed that this audit is almost impossible to do honestly inside a phone whose other inputs are designed to keep you in the long present. Drift inward is the small, private room, the checkpoint built for exactly this kind of inspection. A place to write the 9, mark the dots, and start the slow internal reform on the one that will unlock the others. It is not a fix. It is a single, quiet page on a device whose other pages are designed to never let the imagined future come back. The ruling: you are not falling apart. You are showing the same 6 symptoms every collapsing civilization in history has shown. And every civilization that recovered did the same first move. They reversed the ninth one. Pick one imagined future. Write it down tonight. That is the only intervention history has ever recorded as working.